how it is when you find a recipe and it soon becomes a family favorite. Today I'm going to make a meatloaf, but it's not your typical mother's meatloaf. This is a meatloaf where it calls for some stovetop stuffing and it calls for onions that are sauteed in Italian dressing. This was back in the 1990s from the Kraft magazine. In those days, the Kraft magazine was free, and we loved the recipes that came from it. So I'm going to show you how we're going to make some meatloaf. Also, I have some hash brown potatoes, the broccoli from the dumpster, and we're going to make that into cheesy potato casserole or slow cooker meal, because it's something I've come up with. So let's get started. These tight people make meatloaf, and that was back in the 80s and 90s. You know, back in the 70s, meatloaf was so important as well. But meat has become really expensive, so I'm going to share with you a little bit what I'm going to do. First thing I'm doing is I'm taking hash brown potatoes. Now I'm going to share with you the recipe for the meatloaf at the end of the video, but for the hash browns you're just going to have to watch, because it's just I'm throwing a lot of things together. So we have our broccoli that I got from the dumpster, which you all saw that I froze it. Now we have the broccoli and we have the potatoes. I'm going to add my ingredients to it. So what I add to it is 1 can of whatever cream soup you want. If you want it, I'm using cream of mushroom. So cream of chicken, cream of mushroom, cheddar cheese soup is good too if you want to use that. To that, I'm going to use some of my Cheese Whiz, my homemade Cheese Whiz that I can, and I'm using the same spoon because I'm using all of the cheese that's left. The Cheese Whiz is what really makes it good. As people know by now, my cooking isn't necessarily the healthiest cooking, but it's cooking on very low budget, and it's really good. This is just how I cook. Everybody has a difference of taste and the way they do things, but this is how I do it. We're going to add just a little bit of shredded cheese. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to put this in the crock pot for about 4 to 5 hours. 2 hours on high and then maybe 3 hours on low. And now the cheesy potatoes are prepared. Now we're going to make our meatloaf. First thing that we did is we took 1 onion and sauteed that in 1/3 cup of Italian dressing. That's what really makes this unusual. So we're going to put our sauteed onions in a big bowl. Now I'm going to show you what I am using. I got ground turkey, maybe a month and a half ago for $1.49 a pound. So we're going to take some of the ground turkey. Now, some people would make a meatloaf fully with the ground turkey, but I really like to have some beef in my meatloaf. So we're actually adding another pound of beef with it. The recipe I'm making is going to be a little bit different than what I'm sharing because I'm adding more ingredients. I'm adding a little more meat than what it calls for. But basically it's the same recipe, it's just I'm adding a little more meat because I wanted to use up some of this ground turkey because I had it thawed out. Alright, so there we have all of our meat. Let me go ahead and mix it up a little bit here before I wash my hands and get started. So we have some turkey and some beef. Of course, this is going to last me more than one meal. Sometimes we like eating meatloaf sandwiches. Meatloaf is also really good cold. Alright, let me go wash my hands and then we'll add all of the ingredients to this. For water, and it calls for an egg, white, I'm using 1 whole egg. I like to make things really simple. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a box of stovetop stuffing or whatever stuffing you wish. I get my stuffing really cheap at Aldi. The next thing it calls for is 1 cup of water with 2 egg whites, but I'm using an egg. I'm using a whole egg. And it calls for a 1/2 cup of shredded cheese. Well, I'm going to just measure it. I'm just measuring how I have it. Then I had a piece of cheese left over from the refrigerator, so we're just going to cut this up real fine. Don't you just love it when people eat your food and they leave just a little bit left? So we had just a little bit of this cheese left. And then it calls for ketchup, and it calls for a 3/4 cup. I'm going to measure as well. I'm adding a little more because I have a little more meat in mine. I have about 3/4 to 1 pound extra of the meat. So now here comes the fun part, which everybody loves. We're mixing up the meatloaf. I am going to add a little more ketchup. Alright, so we're going to mix this up. I'm going to use my hands here in a second. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get my Dutch oven because we're going to make one of them in my Dutch oven. Enough for 2 meals. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to form the meatloaf. A little bit of ketchup on the top. We are preheating the oven to 350. Now let's go see what for carrots I have. So I have some tomatoes that were frozen that I was thawing out for another project, but we're going to use a couple of these frozen tomatoes just to give it some flavor along the side. Now this may not be something for everyone, but it really does help give the flavor. We're going to go ahead and cut up our carrots and put on the side as well. Carrots also give a really good flavor with your meatloaf. Now we do have the broccoli and we do have the potatoes in the crock pot, so we don't need potatoes along with this meatloaf. Is our meatloaf in the Dutch oven, and here's our extra meatloaf for later on this week to make with other food. We're going to go ahead, we're going to put it in for 350 for about, we'll try it for an hour. I can usually tell when I look at it if it's finished. So let's get this in the oven. I will cover this with foil as well. And we'll get back to you in just a few minutes. Meal is finished, and look how beautiful this meatloaf is. I let this sit for 5 minutes before cutting. That way it's a little more solid for cutting. Yum, yum. It smells delightful. And add some carrots. So the other meatloaf is cooling off as well. Now let's go ahead and see once. Our potatoes and broccoli and cheese. So the potatoes I got for $1, the broccoli was free, and I used a little bit of cheese. Take a look at that. Yum, yum. Let me give it a try. It feels good to sit down and take a break. I'm doing a lot of work. I'm going to be showing you here in the next couple of days about how you can turn your house into a greenhouse for very little money. I'm working on that today. But it feels good to sit, and let's try it. So This is the broccoli and cheese. Everything is really hot, as you can see. Always turns out so good. And here is our meatloaf. Yum, yum. Take a look at this. It's the best meatloaf you could ever make. And there's so many different flavors in it. I hope you give it a try. And let me know if you did and if your family liked it as well. Take care, everyone. Bye, guys. From Fanny's diary, we're on February 25th, 1943. Fanny writes, "Daddy has been in bed over 1 week. I sure wish he would be on the mend."